y'all, Dixie here. Today I want to fill you in on some tips I feel like every backpacker should know about campfires in the backcountry. I feel like this video is a timely one because if you watched my eclipse video from the Eagle Rock Loop, you might have seen where I found a fire ring that was unattended and had not been put out completely. So anyway, without further delay, let's get started. Tip number one, be aware of the fire limitations in the area that you're backpacking. Some areas don't allow campfires over certain elevations. Some places, it depends on the season, the time of year. Some places don't allow them at all. There can also be temporary fire bans put in place if everything is dry and the risk of wildfire is higher. So just know the situation before you go. Tip number two, location matters. You don't want to build a fire right up under some trees or too close to nearby brush and shrubs. Your campfire shouldn't be bonfire sized anyway, so while it might seem that a small fire shouldn't cause you issues, things can get out of hand quickly. The fire may end up bigger than you intended, and so just to be on the safe side, it's smart to be aware of your surroundings when you're first building the fire. You also don't want to set up too close to people's shelters or your own shelter, tents or hammocks, because stray embers can pop off and end up burning a hole through your fancy tent or tarp for your hammock. Also, in the mind of protecting your gear next to a fire, puffy coats will have a hole in them with a quickness if you sit too close to the fire, or sometimes, again, if you end up being the recipient of one of those popped off embers. And also, when choosing your location, because of leave no trace principles, minimizing your impact, it's preferable if you can choose an area that already has an established fire ring instead of creating a new space to have a fire. If there isn't an established fire ring, but the area says that you are welcome to build a fire, then doing so on a bare surface where there's dirt makes more sense than in an area where you're going to cause more of an impact. Tip number three, having a good fire starter can really get things going if you're having trouble starting a fire. There are several items that you might actually already have on you, so they can be dual purpose. One of those is hand sanitizer, and then any kind of corn chips, so like Fritos or Doritos. Another great fire starter, and this one you can find naturally in the woods, is ladder knot or fat wood, whichever you prefer to call it. If you are not familiar with this, it's basically the heartwood, and you can find it in a stump, but it's not going to be rotted wood. So just ask some backpackers around you if you're not familiar with this to point it out sometime, because that is something that can definitely be useful. And you'll know you found it because one, it'll help get your fire going, but two, it almost has like a fuel scent when you smell it. And of course, other things like pine cones or dead dry leaves will help give you a little burst of flame when you're getting your fire going, but just realize that those things burn hot and fast, so they're not gonna last any length of time. Tip four, it helps if you have your tinder, kindling, and fuel wood already set aside there at the place where you're building the fire before you ever start building it. If you're not familiar with these terms, tinder is any wood that's really like the size of a lead pencil, so really your fine little toothpick pieces of wood. The kindling is going to be anything that's like thumb size or smaller, and then your fuel wood will be things that are about the size of your wrist, or if you've got a really scrawny wrist like me, then maybe the size of your arm. But if you have it all right there with you ready to go, it just makes things much more peaceful. You're not scrambling around for little bits of wood, and also you're not having to go and leave your fire unattended to get bigger pieces. Tip five, green wood does not do well for making a fire. And anyway, you shouldn't be hacking off limbs of live trees. So only go for downed wood when you're building a fire. Tip six, when you are getting your fire going, don't graduate up to those big pieces too soon, because that can just kind of crush your fire before you ever get a good bed of coals going. So you really want to focus on that little stuff for a while, burning little pieces here and there, slowly sizing up until you've got a good bed of coals to start adding those bigger pieces. Some people believe in the TP method. Some people are advocates of the log cabin method, but whichever you use, just make sure you've got a good bed of coals with the little stuff before you graduate up to the arm size stuff. Tip 7, pocket bellows. This is also for really getting your fire going when you're starting the building process. I've never used one of these, but a lot of people suggested it to me. It essentially looks like a telescoping metal straw, but it allows you to provide air, oxygen flow to the fire so it can really light up and burn that wood. If you don't have one of these, then you could use something like maybe a pump sack for filling up your sleeping pad. I would be afraid that some ash would fly up onto it though and put a hole in it. I don't really use mine anyway, so I won't have mine with me on trail, but maybe something like an air pump. Some folks actually carry battery operated air pumps to blow up their sleeping pads, so I assume that steady flow of air would help. And also, worst case, you can just bend down and blow air from your mouth. Tip number 8, if it is windy, opt out of the campfire experience. Winds can cause your little campfire to get out of hand and turn into a full-blown forest fire. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be responsible for that, so your best bet, if it starts getting windy after you've already built a fire, put it out. If it's windy when you're even thinking about building a fire, then change your mind. Tip number 9 is always have a way to put out your fire before you start it. So this means collecting enough water from the water source before you ever start the fire, or making sure you've got enough dirt that you could round up to throw onto the fire if you needed to put it out quickly. But having that safety aspect in place makes sense, but also when it's 9 p.m. and it's time to put out the fire, nobody's gonna feel like walking to the water source to get water to do so. Tip number 10, when it's time to extinguish your fire, make sure you put it out completely. Your best bet is to use water to drown the fire, like completely drown it. You can also use dirt to help mix in to put it out and smother it. But if you're doing this at night, you should be able to turn off your headlamp and see no red glowing whatsoever. And also the ashes should be completely cool to the touch for it to be considered completely out. Tip number 11, do your best to cause minimal impact and also, in the best case scenario, leave no trace. This means things like completely burning the wood that you have put into an established fire ring. Like I mentioned before, putting your fire into an established fire ring, if at all possible, instead of creating a new space to have a fire. Don't burn trash in the fire or leave any trash near the fire ring. And if you aren't using an already established fire ring, then whenever you get done with the space that you had your fire, you can spread out the ashes, like disperse them widely, not just go put them in one big pile to be noticed. And then cover the area that you had your fire with some dirt. You can sprinkle it on. Just try to smooth everything out. Leave a fire ring area nicer than you found it. And if at all possible, make it look like nobody ever had a fire there if somebody were to walk up the next day. All right, y'all, well, that is all I have for you today. I know some of this can seem a little preachy, especially for those who actually do what they're supposed to, but I think it is a good reminder for people who are experienced on how to properly handle fires in the backcountry, and then for those people who are just starting and getting out to know the rules that should be followed to make sure that everybody can continue to enjoy a place because it didn't end up burnt down in a forest fire. Thank y'all so much for watching. If you have any other tips having to do with campfires, please feel free to leave those in the comments below, and we will see y'all next time.